Alrighty, demos. Open.
I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Arise, ye workers, up from your slumber. Arise, ye wretched of the earth. For louder than volcanoes' thunder, it's a better world in birth. All across the glory of creation, they are joining in the fight, linking arms in every nation to face the parasite. So comrades, come rally, and the last fight let us face. The Internationale unites the human race. And so comrades, come rally, for the struggle carries on. The Internationale unites the world in song. We alone are the creators, this world is ours by right. For us the sun will shine forever with its purifying light. So let the ruling classes tremble and try to save their skins. We've nothing to lose except our shackles, and we have the world to win. So comrades, come rally, for the struggle carries on. The Internationale unites the world in song. So brothers and sisters, may the last fight let us face. The Internationale unites the human race.
Thank you very much for that, Paul. That's Paul Shepard. Good afternoon and hello. Welcome to the March Toward May. I'm Peter Coffin, coming to you for the Center for Political Innovation. That's a combo that'll certainly be commented on by some very intelligent people with Twitter accounts. Before we get everything rolling, CPI's owed Caleb Maupin is here to give the Pledge of Unity. Caleb?
Sounds good. Let me just... Yeah, we adjusted.
Oh. Uh-oh. We'll have Caleb back in just a moment.
Oh, boy.
Oops.
Yeah.
Oops.
Hey, Caleb.
Hey there. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
How we're going there. Okay, very good. And so this is the pledge that we've adjusted for the Center for Political Innovation. We've adopted, I should say. So here we go. We pledge that we shall remember this unity forged at the end of the Second World War. Not only today, not only this week, this year, but always. Until we have built the world we have dreamed of and fought for, we pledge ourselves to build the unity of the people of the world all races, all colors, all nationalities, all beliefs, to eliminate all traces of fascism from the earth, to build a deep and sincere international friendship among the peoples of the world, to keep a just, lasting peace, to eliminate want, frustration, and enforced idleness, to build a deep, sincere, we have come to confirm the unity of all people, to salute our comrades who have died, and pledge our word that skillful hands, keen brains, and bold enthusiasm shall never more be wasted in a war. Very good.
Thank you very much for that, Caleb. Inspiring words about the international struggle for ending class society. I'm really happy to be here with you all on a lovely Sunday, envisioning a better world with all of you beautiful people. We have a fantastic program lined up today, too. April is winding down, and of course, May is a big month for international class struggle, where you might make a joke and try to trick your friends and family on April 1st. On May 1st, we celebrate May Day, or International Workers' Day, or if you're the U.S. government, a thing we need to distract people from at all costs. May Day is Labor Day, basically everywhere but the United States. The day was chosen by the Second International to commemorate the Haymarket Affair, which was a riot that started as a peaceful protest in Chicago on May 4th, 1886, the culminating event in the movement for an 8-hour workday. After the Second International chose May 1st, like I said, the U.S. was like, oh, let's make our Labor Day the first Monday in September. The easier it is to forget about the Haymarket crap, the better. We have some great thought-provoking presentations and panels for you here today. We'll be hearing more in depth about the International Workers' Day from David Fox later in the program. May isn't just a big month for class struggle in the labor movement, though. It also marks the 76th anniversary of the end of the World War II in Europe. And to talk more about that, we'll be hearing from Dr. Michael Powelson, who has a wonderful presentation rich in history for us today. We will also have another musical performance from the talented Paul Shepard. Looking forward to that. First off, though, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity. Now, ultimately, class struggle is something that affects each and every one of us. We don't have our hands on the levers of power because we don't own the levers of power. A class of people ruling over us does. That is, in fact, what class is, a relationship to the means of production, the haves and the have-nots. And at a general level, this affects us all in a very similar way. But it's also important we recognize that the world presents unique challenges to many of those among us. To talk about that, we have a panel on neurodiversity led by Charlotte Forrester and several guests. Thanks for being with us today, Charlotte and company. Without further ado, introduce us to everybody and tell us more.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Forrester, and I am the co-chair of the Neurodiversity subcommittee for Young Communist League, which is the youth organization of the Communist Party of the United States. And Jose Santiago is the founder of the Neurodiversity subcommittee, as well as the founder of the Neuro-Marxist analysis. And Jose has made a wonderful PowerPoint presentation for us today. So please take it away, Jose.
Good evening, y'all. I am Jose Santiago. Yeah, we have some great things lined up for this community today. To neurotypicals, we give out solidarity to you all, to those who are of other neurodiversity besides autism, because autism is very prevalent in the neurodiversity movement. We salute you as well. Let's get to the PowerPoint, Charlotte.
Hold on a second. My laptop's on the fritz. It's a little slow today. So bear with me, folks. All right. All right, here we go. All right, can anyone see? Screen. All right, can anyone see?
I see Jose on the screen, but I don't.
You have to.
Well, that's going on while Charlotte is trying to get
We'll
the
just go.
PowerPoint. I wanna talk about the philosophical and psychological properties of neurodiversity. It spawns off of autism. So I'm going to be historically materialist in understanding where neurodiversity comes from and how it came from autism, and how coming from that standpoint, how it diversified into other fields. Well, we all know that autism is medicalized in the DSM-5. The DSM-5 is a medical diagnosis, a text for medical diagnoses, and is not only that, it is the theory of mind that medical professionals have basically absolved with, that they've fused together to that ideology. One of the major factors is we see in from their analysis is, for instance, lack of social reciprocity, qualitative impairments in communications, at least, as it says, at least to one of the following: delay or lack of mental spoken language. You know, it gives you a way in-depth look at it. But in the medical profession, they still don't have a clear theory of mind from a scientific perspective of what autism really is. We're still fighting over the definition today. So because of
And speaking
all
of
these
definitions, I got the slideshow.
Oh, I'm on slide 3. I'm on slide 3. But in this in the list, there's a clear disagreement even of the list in the APA today, the American Psychological Association. But continually, we've noticed a different theory of mind. A different theory of mind has always been around. Autism has played an important role in theories and cognitions in philosophical psychology. The first approach was with deal with the theory of mind to development and a treatment of autism, which from this, it shows that there is other different innate basic mentalities, different worlds of autism. Basically, each autistic lives in a world of their own. That is a better social aspect of autism rather than the medicalized definition, as the medicalized definition has always been fought upon. And because of this root of this unscientific, more metaphysical approach, it has become more socializable in society and more intimate to those of the spectrum, which is also fought upon the spectrum. Going to the history of autism, we seem to see some horror. We see some horror in psychology and psychiatry. We see a bunch of ableism from the beginnings of the psychological profession in the 17 and 1800s, before modern day psychology. We've seen abuses. We've seen dunkings, hangings, people in cages, people spun around in different contraptions. Even the founder of psychiatry, which is one of the founders of our country, Ben, I forget his last, Ben, yeah, I forget his last name, but Ben, it starts with an S. But he's buried in Philadelphia. I remember him, but it's escaping me. But anyway, to get to the meat of this, there has been a lot of abuse, even from the CBT devices, the abuses of how the neural pathways and electronics are used to shock people instead of giving them the affirmation and healing conversations within actual clinical behavioral therapy. They actually give you electronic devices in the 1900s. Electroconvulsive therapy, which has harmed people to this day. But we have to understand that this is before Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. Leo Kanner, who is one of the most grifters of psychology, has been notable in the field of psychology as the founder. But anyway, but looking at beforehand, we've seen a ton of abuse, and this abuse in the psychological profession has even imprisoned those with different neurological behaviors. For instance, you look at the individuals at Salem, Massachusetts. Some psychiatrists, historical psychiatrists, look at that as that there was mental illness that was going on at that time, that it was not these witches and warlocks at the time, and that they really didn't deserve to be beaten. But to get to the real founder of autism, who is noted in the USSR as the founder of autism is Grania Sugarriba. Born in 1891 of 11th of November in Kiev, Russia Empire. Basically, she was born in the time of Nicholas and Isabella in the USSR. She founded the diagnosis of autism in her 1925 paper entitled Die Störung Psychopathin im Kindestalter. I don't know how to say it in German, but I tried my best. But in the details, she describes 12-year-old boys having autistic behavior, and she defines autism rather than what the grifters who really didn't give her enough credit, like Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. And she, during this time, she had to go and put her paper into German scholarship at that time, due to psychology under Stalinism, which healthcare was really critiquable. But she was living in the time when Lenin was in the rise to power. She basically lived in the first International's time, you know, in the time when Lenin rose to power. And because of these amounts of and these issues that came across, these wild socio-political contradictions, her work has not been given credit, and that's due to a lot of imperialism at the time. But Charlotte will go into depth into Grania further. But Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. Leo Kanner grifted founding of autism diagnosis in 1943. He climbed upon Grania's work without giving her credit. Although Hans Asperger, I know, definitely gave her credit, but really he kept her under the rug. The issues with Leo Kanner was that because he was diagnosing Donald Triplett at the time, he basically withheld a diagnosis that was already available at his disposal to a family who was really in need, Donald Triplett's parents, which were desperate for a diagnosis, as the mother would write letters to Leo Kanner at St. Joseph's Hospital constantly. But then you get Hans Asperger, which really is a Nazi, and who really deserves no admiration for the name of Asperger syndrome.
The speaker appears to be frozen. We lost.
Seems like we did.
Did we lose Jose?
Oh, maybe reloading.
He's reloading. There we go. Wow, it's always an adventure here, you know. I guess. Are you there, Jose?
Oh,
you're back. Very good. Continue.
what? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So in Nazism at the time was prevalent in autism, basically fascisticizing autism today. And this is where autism has a lot of different disagreements at the time, because you get a capitalist definition from Leo Kanner, a neoliberal ideology of autism, and then you get Grania Sugarriva's definition of autism, and you get the definition now from a Nazi standpoint of autism, which is Asperger. But let's be more specific. In Ansbjørngrund Hospital, there were more than 400 people killed. You get to see pictures in at the time where they stored the brains of children with not only autism, but all sorts of different other neurodivergencies at the time. You get to see a whole warehouse of brains, and it is totally, utterly disgusting to see how they've experimented on children. Herta Schreiber, one of the victims of Hans Asperger, the mother knew that she was going to get killed by Nazism, and basically the mother was forced to say, "Oh well," while Nazis go and killed this 3-year-old. This 3-year-old Herta Schreiber. There's a picture of the amount of trees. There's trees and a little orchard of trees in commemorating the victims of Ansbjørngrund Children's Hospital at the time. But but let's get back to neoliberalism, which is another form of what I would call fascism, which is Leo Kanner's case 1, Donald Triplett. He was quote unquote labeled as the first to be diagnosed with autism, but he still is alive, not like Herta Schreiber, which was murdered by Hans Asperger, which could have been around 80 to 90 years old of today. But he lived through almost all phases of autism history, from the time of Leo Kanner to the Ivar Lovaas and Bruno Bettelheim, which they are all they're all horrible after that. It goes on a downward spiral, the definition of autism.
Jose, just to help me out, could you just to tell me when to go to the next slideshow, so so we have more time for the other speakers.
I'll give you the thumbs up.
I'm not going to be able to see because this share screen is I'm only going to be able to see.
Okay, I'll say 13 or 14. You know, I'm on slide 13 right now. Bruno Bettelheim, or let's go in order. Bernard Rimland. Bernard Rimland, he was a total problem in autism. You know, he he actually was one of the ones who really did not know autism. He thought that that it would be all just a myth. I don't know if I got that correct. I think it's either him or Bruno Bettelheim that said it would that it's just an aesthetic of them in their psychological conditions. But in the psychological conditions at that time, the definition of autism goes out of hand, because then you get Bruno Bettelheim, which I really hate, and the quote is on the screen, that it would be much better that if the child wouldn't live. Now, this is totally wrong. These people in history, coming from this ableist viewpoint, that people shouldn't live, that people need to be, that these people need to be somehow slapped out of it, basically, instead of being cared for in a intellectual, scientific way of dealing with the diagnoses. For instance, oh yeah, I got it mixed up. Bernard Rimland said that supplements would cure autism. That's the one. Now I got it. And because of this, there's these supplements, you know, saying that you could go to a GNC at the time, which there was no GNCs at the time. The GNC came about in the 70s, I believe. Late 70s. But in this time, when Bernard Rimland in order, this was before, in the 60s and 50s, when he was talking about supplements. And during that time, during the time, he thought it would be best at that time. But let's get to Ivar Lovaas, slapping of autistics, and creating alternative behavior analysis, which has been led to see a decrease in actual effectiveness compared to clinical behavioral therapy, due to the effects that it has, ableist effects that it has on people. Thought that slapping autistics would wake them up. All these different things during the murkiness of how capitalism pushed these individuals have pushed them into reactionary, wrong ways of treating autistics at the time, which led to movements like the neurodiversity movement come out, which during the 70s, Autism Speaks, came out with the green puzzle piece at the time. And because of this association, has created horrible conditions to autistics. And for instance, the Temple Grandin, a doctor of animal farming, which sits on the agriculturalist board, the USDA board chair for the agricultural committees, basically in the most horrible conditions where animals could lie, has basically class traitorized herself in the autism community, thinking that we need to be cured of such conditions. Well, then you see Jim Sinclair, who wrote Do Not Mourn for Us. He's a Canadian, by the way. I put there Democrat, more Democrat leaning because he's a Democrat. He's flipped to a neoliberalized mentality over time, but he was onto something at the time that we do not need to be mourned upon. We don't need to be, looked as a problem which creates this vaccine reactionaries, people who are reactionary to vaccines and vaccination, which has a problem even today with COVID-19. He looks at it as we need to not look at ourselves as people to be feared or outcasts, but to look at us as normal individuals. And because of Temple Grandin's antithesis to and her reactionaryism to this notion, she has become more aligned to Republicanized, ableist views of autism. Now, to get to the real root on 15, policy, we see that the laws of and the history of disability has created a lot of issues for even the disabled. For instance, ADAPT came about in the 70s, and at its peak, we see that the ADA, it had to take Judith Heumann and a bunch of other activists to go up and crawl up the steps of the Capitol of the United States in order to get some legislation accomplished. But sad to say that legislation has been spoken out of both sides of its mouth, and it has harmed the autism population of our day, and we require more reform, more action, and because of this, other acts, even the No Child Left Behind Act, has neoliberalism has harmed people's thinking, literally, because of the the education side of things and the No Child Left Behind Act has left millions of children behind from literacy wise, from being creating and getting new mentalities and a better framework of literacy in their brains. And because of this this neoliberal policy, it has created current issues. For instance, we require free healthcare, not because of it being the standpoint of just creating a reform, but it's to create socialism for those of us who are neurodiverse, to create social and economic equity, which I prefer more social equality, economic equity, but I digress. But it creates equity economically, and it's a step to equality. But we also have seen racism due to this neoliberal policy, as we see the No Child Left Behind Act has left millions of BIPOC individuals from getting literacy and obtaining more knowledge due to the lack of funding of the education system and due to this neoliberalized policy. And it's created excessive behavioral disorders. It's created disorders that have made students act out in more students act out in the classroom, and it has made our schools and has pushed our schools more to prisonization rather than to create our schools safe from any sort of militarization in our day and era. And because of this, it has also made Black and brown folk easily to be segregated. Special education classrooms is another form of segregation from each other and alienation from each other, instead of creating a space where socially the disabled can be integrated and assimilated. This is why there's another act called the Disability Integration Act.
Jose, we are running short on the time allotted for this panel. So do you think other folks from the neurodiversity panel could make some comment before we move on from the end of this? A great presentation, by the way. I'm learning a lot. Yeah. I was taking notes as you were speaking, so thank you very much. Do we want to hear from some other folks on the neurodiversity panel before we move on to our next section? Yeah. Okay. Do we want to hear from Charlotte or Robert?
I actually have a speech prepared.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, let me just. Good evening, folks. How are you all doing? Anyway, I want to talk to you about what autism struggles means to me, as well as how it relates to class struggle. What does autism struggle mean to me? What does class struggle mean for someone on the autism spectrum? To me, autism struggle is not being autistic, but rather in navigating in a society that is inherently ableist. For me, class struggle is realizing that my economic position will always be fragile because I do not have the typical marketable skills that require me to pull myself out of poverty when I am on my own. Of course, that's usually the case for most people who aren't prodigies or big tech geniuses. I mean, just look at me. I could barely even organize a slideshow. But well, I mean, the proof of the presentation, but you get what I'm going at. Anyway, in a society that does value effortless success, people who finish last despite their hardest efforts are looked down upon as mediocre or stupid or the quote unquote R word, which I will not be repeating. If an autistic person isn't some sort of technological savant that is STEM approved, then that person is not deemed worth it. During a 1972 interview with Angela Davis, she stated that racism, in terms of its material basis, means superexploitation. Economically, it means that Black people get the worst lot economically. This can be expanded in terms of material basis of ableism, meaning that within an already marginalized group, disabled people are further marginalized. Within Black, Brown, Indigenous American, and Asian American communities, and even in LGBTQI communities, it is the disabled person that receives the very least of crumbs. Whenever there is a genocide, it is usually disabled people that are first in line for extermination. Take Germany, for instance. During the Nazi era, disabled people are often referred to as useless eaters, a term that is used in a grossly offensive campaign that states in the following: this person suffering from hereditary defects costs the community 60,000 Reichsmark during his lifetime. Fellow German, that is your money too. In other words, our existence is deemed a waste of resources and taxpayers' money. Disabled children, for instance, as shown from our PowerPoint presentation, were sent to a clinic in Vienna where the children underwent cruel experimentations and eventually were euthanized. Organizations such as Autism Speaks is a thinly veiled eugenics project that seeks to quote-unquote cure for autism by trying to find the autistic gene so that parents who find themselves pregnant with an autistic child would be pressured to have them aborted in an exercise of Malthusian compassion. One of their infamous campaigns called Autism a Burden on Families, and as well as, being autism tears families apart and makes families go broke. We're taught that children who are born with autism or disabilities have limited intellectual and social abilities because we are less likely to succeed in this world. We are less likely to succeed in this capitalist hellscape because not only are we alienated from our own labor, we're often alienated from the rest of society and immediate communities. It is because of it that it is of the utmost importance that the disabilities rights movement and autistic self-advocacy organizations must focus on working class struggle. If we do not center disability and autistic liberation from to class struggle, then our struggles will be reduced to that of assimilation. It's already come to my attention that a police department in Malden, Massachusetts, have made a statement of embracing neurodiversity in honor of Autism Acceptance Month. I'm not accepted by this, but this is still unacceptable. The police, as an institution in the United States, are enemies to the autistic community everywhere. They're already trying to defang us, to make us cower, to make us complicit in the genocide of every neurodivergent. A good friend of mine, who is also autistic, whom I looked up to years ago as he was a leader in the autistic rights movement called Youth Power. After years of financial struggle, personal setbacks, and being horrendously harassed by 2 officers last year when he was dealing with an autistic burnout, his fighting spirit has been distinguished. In a society where the powers that be would rather see us dead or just gone, instead of embracing our existence as human beings who function differently than most people because we're annoying, we're creepy, we're bothersome, a nuisance, we're worthless. They want people like us to be locked away from the rest of the world, further alienating us as it is. That is why I, as a communist, want to be part of building a new world, a world that works for not only the average working person, but where people who are considered below average can live full lives, and not only live full, sustainable lives, but lead humanity towards a better world. Thank you. And we also have Robert Webb with us today as well.
Hello. Is my mic working? Yeah.
Yes.
I think so.
Hear you loud and clear. Yes.
I can
Okay.
hear you.
So, okay. So I'm, okay. Let me pull up the speech right here. Okay. So I'm high-functioning autistic. I'm honored to speak with the Center for Political Innovation. Today I'm going to discuss autism and the need for socialism. And why is there a need for socialism in the autistic community? Under capitalism, there is a massive unemployment in the autistic community. According to the 2017 Market Watch, 85% of college graduates affected by autism are unemployed. Why is this? Because one reason, there's multiple factors to this, but one of it is the theory of unemployment, the army of the unemployed, and the need to for capitalists to basically threaten workers with threaten workers to unemployment through well, I should say through basically threaten them to unemployment, or accept lower wages, or threaten to throw them out in the streets. But there's also another reason, because they also rely a lot on the new customer service jobs are showing up. It's harder for autistic people to, unless they want to. It's basically kind of like what they were saying. You have to be more neurotypical to get these jobs. You have to act more neurotypical to get these jobs, and for the customer service sports, rather than so. Well, how would socialism be different? Socialism would guarantee a right to a job for everyone. There would be a greater focus on science-based, logical, and manufacturing careers, and there will be a workplace where in the workplace there would be a change in work, not the worker. The autistic and neurodiversity will have a say on how the workplace is run. Instead of using loud, noisy machinery, they would most likely use machinery that would best fit them. So, yeah. So, in order to get this done, we needed to bring both autistic people and neurotypical people, and show them why socialism is the answer and how it benefits everyone. We are all in this together. Solidarity, comrades. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, Jose, and Robert. Understanding the history behind any struggle helps fill in some of the gaps that no one just inherently knows. Understanding where neurodivergence as a concept and a category comes from and how people have been ideologically separated, labeled, and ultimately oppressed is the kind of information we don't really see enough of in an environment where we hear it's not my job to educate you all the time. in reality, in more neoliberal spaces, we aren't getting these kinds of firsthand accounts. And we're certainly not being told how socialism could help the neurodiverse. So thank you very much to all of you for sharing this history, knowledge, and perspective. Incredibly interesting, and people can take the information presented and build on it in their own research. Moving on, we have another musical performance by the talented Paul Shepard. Paul, if you'd be so kind as to grace our ears with another song.
Working overtime, sweating for their dime, their labor stolen from them, they do not know what it's worth. One day they will rule the earth. To the farmer on the land, bending down in toil, harvesting the soil, working through the cold and heat, growing rice and wheat. One day they will rule the earth. And to the killers of our dreams, the fat cats and their schemes, their hungry war machine, the bankers and businessmen, those privileged from their birth, we will drive them from the earth. The song is for the workers of the world. Our challenge has been hurled. Our flag, it is unfurled. Sisters, brothers, shed your chains. Let the fight begin. We have a socialist world. We have a socialist world. We have the whole wide world to win. You'll hear from the boss, hear from the banker. If you go to your mother, will you tell her that we thank her? She worked all her life and wore down her health to raise us a wage slave much like herself. But when we're free, you will see that the future belongs to the worker. Hear from the liars in the corridors of power how lucky you are to toil hour after hour. How lucky you are to be breaking your back so the leeches on Wall Street can stay in the black. But when we're free, you will see that the future belongs to the worker. High up above, looking down from their plane, the rich ones luxuriate in ill-gotten gain. They strangle the weak, they devour the poor, and as much as they have, they will always want more. We slept so long, but when we are strong, it's the future belongs to the worker. Awakened American worker. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. That was fantastic. We all loved that. Also, the little surprise second song there. I enjoyed that particularly. At the start of the program, we talked a little bit about International Workers' Day. This is obviously important information for all of us. So thankfully, we have another presentation from David Fox here. It's going to go into a lot more depth. Would like to throw to him. David.
Well, thank you, and good morning all for everyone from here in Australia. And it's a particularly cold morning here down in central Victoria, and I'm just trying to keep warm while I'm doing this talk. Now, May Day, obviously International Workers' Day, May the 1st, is something very dear to everyone's heart in the socialist communist movement, but anyone that's involved in workers' struggle anyway through a trade union or even throughout their community. I think we're looking back, there's strong connections too with May Day and first of all the fight for the shorter hours for a shorter workday. And obviously going right back to the early part of the 19th century, early 1800s, there were many struggles for shorter hours right through Britain, in Europe, and no doubt in the US there. And understand too that workers in that time were under very appalling conditions, a lot of them working up to actually 20 hours a day. The physical well-being of workers was never a consideration of the capitalist class. There were a lot of malnutrition, lack of sleep. The actual lifespan of an average worker, lucky to live in their 40s, was regarded as a very good innings, as the term we use here in Australia. So a shorter workday was imperative in part of the struggle for workers. And obviously during that time, a lot of strike leaders were obviously arrested, sent over here to Australia. They were charged for all sorts of heinous crimes just for merely trying to organise workers and benefit workers' lives. In Australia, for example, it was quite interesting. Australia was quite interesting. We actually were quite on the 21st of April, 1856, on the back of the Goldfields rebellions. The first 8-hour day was ever won by stonemasons in Melbourne. They just walked off the job. That was it. They're not doing any more than that 8 hours, and had a massive rally throughout Melbourne at that time. And that was probably pretty much the very first Labor Day, but fight for further 8 hours here in Australia was won. Eventually spread throughout the course of many industries later on for the next 60 years, right up through to the early part of the 20th century. But it's something very historical for us, and it was actually commemorated the other day in Ballarat on the 21st of April, and it was actually where the site of the first commemoration marches of the Labor Day happened there. Ballarat's a very significant site for a lot of us here in Australia. It's the site of the Eureka Stockade, which is the end of the Goldfields rebellions, but also played a very significant role for the all intercolonial trade union congresses at the time, and also the development of the first social democratic parties. And so Ballarat was a great place to have it, and it was a good way to actually lead up to May Day. May Day itself obviously was consolidated in the Second International, I believe, in the year 1889 after the 1886 Chicago riots, and it was then endorsed by the International to have it on 1st of May. And throughout then, it's actually been a consistent fight for us here in Australia to actually have it on 1st of May. I believe there's been it was actually quite a concerted effort by a lot of employers around the world not to have us all march on and have solidarity on that particular day. And for very obvious reasons, the more that workers realise their solidarity and their strength, the more ability they have confidence in themselves to make significant changes for themselves, but even possibly change the system. So obviously they feared that, employers have feared that, and politicians have feared that from day one. I think it's in Australia here, for example, Labor Day itself, there are public Labor Day holidays, but in the various states, difference is not on May the 1st. Any day that's close to May the 1st is either in Queensland, Northern Territory, where they have it on the first Monday of May. But everywhere else, for example, the holiday itself here in Victoria is on the second Monday of March, and I believe in Western Australia it's the first Monday of March, and in New South Wales, I'm led to believe it's, I think, at the first weekend of October. It falls around that time. So there, you could just see there's a pattern there developing, and I believe in the US, Labor Days usually celebrated in September. So there's quite a interesting pattern here that there was quite a deliberate attempt to actually have us all divided and not actually united on that one day. But the struggle for shorter hours, and I just want, before I'm jumping too far, the struggle for shorter hours was certainly an endless struggle from there on. And obviously it took many more years for the 8-hour day to be implemented. In Australia, too, we've got a very rich history of fighting for a shorter work week. And it was quite a jewel in the crown for our trade union movement here. We won first of all, the 48-hour week, down to a 44-hour week in the 1940s, which culminated thereafter a 40-hour week. We're still doing 80 hours a day, but it was, but we even shortened the work week. And then in this 1970s, the fight for a 35-hour week commenced. In some industries, they managed to achieve it in the petrochemical and also some of the white-collar industry and banking industry as well. But this year as well is quite an historical year for us. It's actually the 40th anniversary of the 38-hour week, which was actually won by a lot of the metals unions, a lot of the predecessor unions that I'm involved in now. And it was something that's always, I take to a lot of pride in myself for that. And what happened then is for the struggle for shorter work week and shorter hours. Back then, the workers were organised, but they just took it. They actually just took it. There was massive opposition by governments and employers, obviously, but in defiance, we're working it. That's what we're doing. We're off the job. See you later. And that's how it became implemented from there on. And out of that 38-hour week, a lot of workplaces and a lot of industries actually adopted what we call a roster day off once a month. So they did still work 40 hours, but 2 hours of that went to a roster day off once a month. So it allowed them the ability to have it at least one Monday off or one Friday off a month to able to pursue other means if they needed to look after their own business affairs or, go off pay bills, etc. So, but it allows them to have that ability to have an extra leisure time off one day. And we've usually when there's a long weekend following, we put their roster day off at the end of the long weekend so we can have an extended one. Later in the years, we're at the late 1980s and more so the 1990s, the construction industry achieved the 36-hour week, and that was a bit of a fight as well. And now it's actually grown right across all the construction sites where it's 36-hour week, but they work as a 9-day fortnight. So they can really have that extra day off once a fortnight. And obviously for a construction project, it is only a limited time. Once the project's finished, it's finished. That's it. The building's done. That's it. Off you go looking for another job. So that allows them to actually, in the time during the duration of the project, allow them actually a benefit of having a little bit more longevity in their employment as well. So it's something for us in Australia, and I think I like to say that around the rest of the world. I think and share that with the rest of the world. I think it's vitally important and it can be done, even under tough economic circumstances as well. And like a lot of the countries around the world, we've got rich histories of struggle, and we have to tap into that, and I'm trying to reinvigorate that as well. Currently here in Australia, back to the actual day of May the 1st, there is now a struggle to actually have it May Day on May the 1st. It was a movement that started off in Sydney 3 years ago, May 1st movement, and it was actually two unions endorsed it, and they actually praised their trade union council at the time and said, well, basically, and the trade union council was actually run by some very conservative forces. They said, well, you're only just going to have a few groups turn up with red flags and that's it. Well, lo and behold, other unions adopted to have it on May the 1st, and they decided not to go to the traditional May Day march, was the first Sunday of March. They just wound up being on May the 1st, and they had 10,000 workers turned up just for that alone, which was actually quite a phenomenal for us. And it built up from there on. Now, finally, that trade union body has actually adopted the 1st of May as May Day itself. Where I'm in, actually, Bendigo here in central Victoria, the actual local trade union hall, we adopted May the 1st as well. We want the rallies on May the 1st, not just the most convenient Sunday of the month. And there was a group now set up in Melbourne to have that push and campaign to have it back on May the 1st. And everywhere in Australia, there's now murmurings now, and we want to have this all consolidated on the one day with the rest of the world. So it's really important. And the reason why we want to actually push it for, it's about international class solidarity. And that's what we want. We're all in this together. We're not these separate little regions isolated from each other. We're all understand we're under one worldwide global system called imperialism, capitalism. And it's affecting us one way or the other in our respective countries. And it isn't a perfect opportunity that we all can march on the same day together and to actually build that international solidarity up. The purpose of that, once again, is also to show that workers united will never be defeated, obviously, but they're then able to achieve great things. And if we are looking for social change to change the social economic system from capitalism to socialism, well, wouldn't this be a great way to start? And I think it's important for us in our communities and the ethnic groups and that to have this adopted. We're all united. We're united by class. We're all united by all our untold sufferings, what imperialism throws onto us. But also important too, May Day must be linked to current struggle, must be linked to the current concerns of everyday working people around the world. There has been in the past some more sort of adventurism. Yes, we want socialism, we want this, we want that, all these great things. But if it's not related to the current struggles of workers, then we can completely lose them, and they wouldn't even bother turning up for a march. So we've always got to be very, very wary of that, and keep that in mind. That's why it's vitally important to get out of the movement and into the masses, where we engage with everyday ordinary working people. And then realize the importance of marching on that day. It's about building our strength again. We don't have to feel like we're isolated anymore, or alone, or we're feeling helpless, etc. We can do this. And history has shown us that we can actually make change. It didn't just happen, just a few people doing the fight for everybody else that made the changes. We've seen it was actually the masses made history through and through, be it through a trade union struggle, through a revolution, etc. It wasn't one or two people. Sure, they played an important role, but it was actually the masses that made the change. And that's what May Day should be actually showing around the world, I think, what we can do and what we should be able to do. May Day was obviously celebrated in many ways. I'm actually very impressed with how May Day is organised in Cuba, where we got millions of people hitting out in the streets of Havana. I think if anyone's seen it, would be quite impressed as well. But even too, within a lot of the European countries, it's actually the movement's growing again. And I actually just yesterday, when I was actually on Working Class Revolt, we had a Greek comrade, and I've actually seen the footages of the May Day marches in Greece, and they're absolutely something to be pretty impressed by, very impressed by. And I think it's around the world, as their struggles intensifying, these movements will grow. And I think that's something we can look forward to if we can do some sort of international coordination, how we can effectively revive May the 1st again as May Day. And I think we've got a lot to work. We've got a lot of material, work and materials do a lot of work to do. However, we've got a lot we can now use now, and I think that the times now are actually coming into our advantage to do so. Though in Australia, we actually have a lot more work to do in that regards. It's not going to just happen overnight. It's a great time to actually have this discussion and moving forward as well. I would actually strongly advise anyone that's watching these lives, if they're not involved, is to find out where the local May Day is happening. And even if it's not happening on May the 1st this time around, maybe start getting together with other like-minded people and start engaging with these other workers, and that how about, well, next year we're trying to organise a May Day rally for May the 1st. It's something that's always very dear to our hearts, and it's a very important part of the year. Obviously, some great victories have been won through May Day around the world, and it's certainly something to celebrate as well. But once again, I must emphasise this: it has to be relevant to current working struggles of ordinary people. Otherwise, it can be completely lost on them as well. Obviously, in some areas, it's going to be a lot harder, especially if you're a regional or a remote area, rural area. It's usually not the first thing that's on people's mind. But one thing that has to be done is like what someone did to me one time: is give me a nudge out the door, or at least give it a try. And even that, you didn't have to be alone to try and organise it. And I'll actually too, I just want to emphasise why once again the importance of international solidarity. Marx actually once said, "Workers of all countries unite." And I think, as Marxists, that we need to keep that always in the back of our mind. Our struggle here is your struggle over there, and vice versa. All our struggles are against one common foe, and that wouldn't be perfect for May the 1st, is that we all united against that one common foe. That's what it is, and that common foe is the imperialist, the capitalist class themselves. And someone has said, I know someone of the Wobblies quite correctly called them the parasite class. And I think it's I think it's quite frankly that's what it is. We got to put our petty differences to a side and unite on that day, and I think that's what's important. As an old trade union saying back from the late 1800s goes, the unity of labour is the hope of the world, and I think that's something that still rings true to this day, and we need to carry that into our banner. And Marx said, and Marx correctly, as I just mentioned, workers of all countries unite, because you could just imagine everywhere around the world, workers marching, everyone marching on May the 1st, and it will certainly send shockwaves. And I think that gives everyone the boost, the confidence in order to move that one step further and achieve social change. I don't have generally anything else much to add on to that as well, but I just wanted to share that experience leading up to May Day. I highly recommend it. Once again, is to be involved in the various organisations. You find out where it's happening, and obviously go from there. And well, one thing, try not to do it alone if you can, but obviously feel free to ask questions, and we're trying to provide you with any assistance. So I like to leave it at that, or I'm trying to keep it short. There'd be a lot more I can add on. I could be here all day explaining it, get right to a whole history lesson. But I thought, look, I'll touch on these briefly and I want to just give a way forward. So I want to round it off what Mark said, workers of all countries unite. Thank you.
What a presentation, David. That was packed with information. It's always great to know more about what scares the capitalists, imperialists, and politicians. It's interesting that in Australia, they're doing the same thing, trying to separate the workers' marches from May Day. Again, they would really all love us to forget about the historical events that took place around that time, as well as keep us from unifying as one around the same time for the same reason. So thanks for all of that. Another huge worldwide event that occurred was the Second World War, which in May, the 76th anniversary of the victory in Europe, is going to take place. To tell us more about that, Dr. Michael Powelson joins us. We are all very excited and interested in what you have to say, Dr. Powelson, so I will turn it over to you.
Fascinated with Jose's presentation, and Charlotte, very, very good. Considering why is it that people who have this thing we identify as autism are treated differently? And I looked up some statistics, and people who are identified with this particular attribute are paid a lot less. Because otherwise, I don't see what the point of doing, why there's even that distinction. If you look at the Wikipedia webpage, they identify autism as a disorder. And what's the disorder? I don't really see that. I've had many students and friends and people that are in various degrees of the spectrum. And, to Charlotte and Jose's point about capitalism. But at any rate, I found that fascinating. Both discussions I'm going to probably underwhelm all of you. I would take exception to David's comment that the capitalists are the parasites. Would you say the parasites of the working class, or just the parasites of the world? Dave, what did you say?
Oh.
Yes, I did say that. I'm guilty of saying that. Yes.
No, that you said they were the parasites of the working class?
No, I said actually the capitalist class, the imperial class. So someone in the Wobbly said to me once, the parasite class.
Well, I think that's an insult to parasites. Thank you. Also, it's, you didn't get a chance to mention it, David, but Harry Bridges was wobbly, and he organized the West Coast strike from Australia. Solidarity. Very good. Can you all, I don't know if there's a big lag. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit here. But...
Oh, yeah. I don't have that good a connection. Sorry. I never did. When I do the Zoom classes, it seems to be okay if I don't have anything else going on my, which I don't think I do. So anyway, bear with me and let me know if I break up or something like that. All right. And I think compared to the discussions about May Day and some of the issues around autism, mine will probably sound mundane. I'm worried that a lot of you probably are familiar with some of this stuff, but I'll forge ahead anyway, and I'll start my discussion by a much more modern event that fast forward from the end of World War II to the 1990s. Jimmy Carter's national security advisor was the big Brzezinski, who is now dead, but he advised Carter to give money and arms to Islamic fundamentalists in Afghanistan in the 1980s in order to undermine the pro-Soviet regime that was in Afghanistan. And of course, that resulted in a horrific civil war in Afghanistan that caused the death of over 1 million Afghans in that civil war in the 1980s. And at the end of it, these Islamic fundamentalists took over from the pro-Soviet government, which was a secular government. I had the good fortune of traveling to Afghanistan in the 1970s. I was just on the hippie trail and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But at that time, it was a secular government, and the leaders were suicide, and women weren't expected to cover themselves, and there were girls in the public school system, and there were women in the bureaucracy. And our government, was very instrumental in ending that and catapulting a religious fundamentalist regime into power, the Mujahideen, who then gave way to the Taliban. And at the end of all of this, Zbigniew Brzezinski was in France, and he granted an interview to a French journalist, and he bragged about the US's role in the Afghan civil war. And he said, it was only because we gave money and arms to these Mujahideen fundamentalists that we stabilized the Afghan governments and then forced the Soviet Union to invade. As he called it, the Afghan trap. And he was very proud of this, because he said with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, this totally undermined, it was the beginning, it was like sort of, he called it, the Soviet Union's Vietnam. And the French journalist, to his credit, said to Brzezinski, a million people died in that civil war. I mean, don't you feel any responsibility for that part of it? And Brzezinski said, why, anything in the pursuit of crushing communism wherever it exists in the world. I mean, this is the kind of sociopathic mentality that still dominates today, unfortunately. And back then, these people are psychologically unstable, the people that run our foreign policy. And the reason I did that is because that's basically the perspective of the US in the end of World War II. But the kind of pathological obsession with finding, quote, communists anywhere and everywhere and utterly obliterating them at whatever cost is irrelevant to the US government leaders and our business leaders. I think probably a lot of you know that, like Henry Ford and Alfred Sloan, James Moody and General Motors, and Tom Watson, who was international business. They were all great fans of Hitler and the Nazis. And so from a bigger perspective, the United States at the end of World War II picks up the mantle of fighting communism that had been carried by the Nazis in Germany and by the fascists in Italy. And so it's from that perspective, I think, that we can understand the end of World War II. It wasn't about necessarily defeating the Germans per se. In fact, the United States and Britain had long delayed the opening of a second front. So early as 1941, there was discussion between the United States, the Soviet Union, and Britain about, given the fact that Germany had invaded the Soviet Union and the Soviet Union was having to deal massive military assault. 80% of all of the German military power was focused on the Soviet Union. Stalin was desperate for the United States and Britain to open a second front, and they just didn't. and now declassified, documents very clearly that they didn't really mind that Nazis were slaughtering Soviet soldiers and citizens. They wanted to weaken the Soviet Union. That's what they wanted more than anything. And Churchill was more open about it than Roosevelt, but both of them didn't really see what the problem was. So they gave verbal promises to the Second Front and then didn't deliver. Then when they finally did do a second front, it was North Africa, which even people in our own military were really, why the U.S. would do that, open up a second front in North Africa, because that was just down in an area that wasn't going to really challenge the German, military might in Europe to any great degree. And of course, the reason is that the United States and Britain didn't really mind that Germany was, engaging in mass slaughter in the Soviet Union. It's only with the Soviet victory in Stalingrad and the German army is defeated and turned around that the United States and Britain began to talk seriously with the Soviet Union about, terminating this conflict. But again, they delayed and delayed. The Normandy invasion wasn't until June of 1944. At that time, the Soviet army was already on the border with Poland. I mean, Germany was going to lose. Everybody understood that. So Germany is in full retreat. And I would contend that the Normandy invasion was not really, motivated by defeating Nazi Germany so much as it was motivated to try to stop the Soviet Union. Because once they turned the German army back at Stalingrad, then there was a huge front in which, systematically the Soviet army was pushing the German Wehrmacht further and further west to its ultimate defeat. Winston Churchill even suggested, once he saw that the Soviet Union was progressing westward and was on its way not only to Berlin, but I think a lot of the capitalists, they saw the possibility of the Soviet army maybe taking, Belgium or France. Although I think a lot of strategists would say that was probably not realistic, but nonetheless, they were worried about a total Soviet victory in Europe, and so Churchill even came up with the crackpot idea of launching a military invasion in Greece to send U.S. and British troops, north to cut off the Soviet advance. But even the U.S. and British military command said, "That's okay, Winston. That we don't need to hear that idea anymore." And to that end, this obsessive anti-communism was, the support gave even before the war was over with to the Greek, fascist supporters, the Greek anti-communists in the Greek Civil War, and the same thing in Turkey, where they gave support to the Turkish right wing. One of the reacts about the end of the World War II and the post-World War II period is that the United States and Britain had to find people that would help them in the fight against communism throughout Europe, and that would have been the fascists. And so again and again and again, the United States is making alliances with very fascistic groups in Eastern Europe, or even in the Soviet Union. There was the Ukrainian government is very much dominated now by people that claim as their tradition these pro-fascist movements in Ukraine during World War II. So, there was from the beginning this effort at stopping what the U.S. perceived as the spread of Soviet influence, and no amount of violence, death, destruction was, considered unacceptable. So we have in the post-World War II period some really horrific slaughter going on in the name of stop spread communism. Right? Even the bombings. I'm just one of the chats there. I don't know how much you guys know about this, but the the decision to drop the atomic bomb, both of them, was objected to even by a lot of people in the U.S. military because they felt that Japan was already defeated. It was not necessary to do. The narrative that we get in the United States is that the bomb forced Japan to surrender, but that's not why it surrendered. But many people then and now said, let's send a message to the Soviet Union. So the United States made a decision to drop these two weapons on million populations in cities that were not militarily important, basically just to send a message to the Soviet Union that we have this atomic weaponry. So this is a kind of sociopathic thinking that dominated. George Kennan articulated it. He was a State Department official, and he wrote his memo on containment, it's called, in which he said, given that the Soviet Union is here to stay, we can no longer try to, over and defeat it as we had in the past, but we must contain the spread of communism. And Kennan himself was a very elitist, arch right-winger. He didn't believe in civil rights. He didn't believe in women's rights. And he was very contemptuous of the working class. I think he was with Roosevelt at the conference in Yalta, and he commented that it was in the Soviet Union. He commented that this hotel was being run, and Union was run by a bunch of fucking peasants, is the way that Kennan looked at it. So there was a high level of elitism on the American side, and vehement anti-communism at what I would say to a sociopathic degree, right? Even up to today. And of course, with this containment, anything's possible. So that on one hand, the United States Marshall Plan would only give money for capitalist economic endeavors. Even though the East European countries and the Soviet Union were more than willing to take, money from the Marshall Plan initially, when government said, oh, by the way, we'll only give you this money to build a Ford Motor plant in the Soviet Union. The answer was, well, we don't have that kind of a system. They said, well, you don't get the money. And what that effectively did was to create, to develop these two camps where the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe increasingly are becoming independent economically, not because of their desire, because the United States and the vehement anti-communism that pervaded every element of American political and economic elite class, and that went to foreign policy, like Vietnam. It was clear that the Viet Minh were the most popular group in Vietnam in 1945, but the U.S. backed the French support of the reoccupation of it, and a bitter civil war was then fought that ended in the defeat of the French in Dien Bien Phu. But even with that, now the United States, in order to stop communism, quote unquote, they recommit their forces in Vietnam. The smoke settled in 1975. 4 million Southeast Asians had been, because of this fight in a country halfway around the world from the United States, mostly pre-industrial agrarian society. So, the extent to which our anti-communist foreign policy was willing to, do anything necessary to crush communism. Also in the United States, the Smith Act, was passed that basically, allowed the government to round up anybody that was a member of an organization that they considered to advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government, however that was interpreted. There was also the House Un-American Activities Committee in the post-World War II period to go after any communists or socialists, or even people that weren't, and that, a lot of, the people that ended up being blacklisted were not actually even members of the American Communist Party or any of the socialist organizations, but just the mere mention that they might be a part of it. I did the movie Trump, everybody saw that. because at least this is a film about a guy who was openly a communist, Dalton Trumbo. He said, yes, I am a member of the Communist Party, and I don't apologize. So much of the film focused on the Red Scare. Previous to that, focused on somebody who was unfairly accused of being a communist. But it always leaves open the question, you know, this anti-communist Cold War environment of ours, well, I guess it's okay if the guy's really a communist. Well, it's not okay even if somebody is a communist. I mean, they're not doing anything wrong. But that kind of obsession after World War II to accuse people who weren't communists of being communists, or even the ones that, you know, they were very productive in any number of industries, and yet they had their, livelihoods absolutely destroyed. One of them was John Garfield, who is a great. He refused to testify, name any names in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, and for that he never worked again, just simply because he refused to name names. And somebody that knew Garfield, because Garfield died at a young age of a heart attack, and they think it was related to his not being able to work, and he started drinking heavily. And one of the people that knew Garfield well said that, you know, the irony of it was that Garfield was a street kid from New York, and he was really interested in politics. He was an actor, but where he came from, you don't rat on anybody. And so they told him to name names. He said, I'm not going to do it, you know, and his career comes to an end. So at home, there's this kind of purging that goes on. Taft-Hartley Amendment limited the right of workers to go on strike. And they also made workers sign loyalty oaths, right? They made union officials, they had to sign a loyalty oath. And there were many members of communist and socialist organizations that were union operatives who, you know, didn't want to do this, first of all, and I don't blame them, and I don't think that anybody in this country should be made to sign a loyalty oath. That sounds very totalitarian as far as I'm concerned. And also, they felt it was unconstitutional. And so by doing this, between the Smith Act and the Taft-Hartley Amendment, the trade union movement is purged, right? In the post-World War II period, foreign policy is going to be containment and no amount of, death and murder in stopping communism abroad. And then at home, laws that imprison people, throw at the same time that, there's horrific violence against blacks during the civil rights movement, and our government isn't doing anything about that. So within the FLCIO, it becomes it became a founding member of the International Federation of Free Trade Unions. So our AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, becomes a movement that globally is empowered with money from the CIA to go after any trade union movement that's communist, socialist dominated, which was most of them, understandably. Communists advocate for workers. And in France, in Italy, in Brazil, in Mexico, the trade union leadership tended to be either socialist or communist. And the American Federation of Labor, the AFL-CIO, with its staunchly anti-communist leader, George Meany, participates in this, effort to undermine any communist or socialist-led, trade union movement. After World War II, the largest single political in Italy and in France were the communists, right? And yet between undermining the communist trade union movement, they even sent Frank Sinatra to Italy to encourage Italians not to vote for communists. And of course, the Catholic Church lowered the boom, the Communist Party and the French Communist Party. And then they were just voted out of the government completely. One of the ironies of the whole outrage of the post-Cold era was the claim that the Soviet Union was not allowing, capitalist parties to operate in Eastern Europe, which actually wasn't technically true, but nonetheless, the United States was supporting governments in France and in Italy. Also, were really, banishing the communist parties. So, in the East, the Soviet Union was going to establish its military hegemony over those nations that the Red Army had occupied, and the same thing was going to happen in the West. And there's not going to be communist, government in France or Italy, despite the fact that they were the largest political party. And then in the United States, our labor movement, the people that, in the post-World War II period were first and foremost, really anti-communists. So George Dean, of course, Jimmy Hoffa, Chavez, United Farm Workers, all of these guys were first and foremost, really, committed anti-communist more than anything else. And so whether you're talking about foreign policy or domestic policy, in the post-World War II period, the focus is, crushing communism at all costs. One of the earliest endeavors was the U.S. Assault on Korea. We spoke about Korea earlier. I didn't want to cast aspersions on North Korea. I always, remind my students that over 1 million Koreans were killed in the U.S. assault on Korea, and every city and town and village in the entire peninsula was bombed by the United States. So if North Koreans feel a little bit hesitant towards the U.S., I certainly do not blame them. It's hard to put it in context because here in the United States, we haven't been bombed by anybody, so it's hard for us to appreciate that. But, our foreign policy has had to really, backing a really right-wing organizations all over the world, and up till this day, and all under the rubric of fighting communism. To this end, slaughters have been carried out. The anti-communism theme knows no boundaries. In Argentina in the 1970s, there was a dirty war in which, among the other horrible that the dictatorship did, was that they rounded up young people that were suspected of being communists, and they would torture them. And then when they could get anything more out of them, they took them out to an airfield. They shot them with pentothal, because people that know they're going to be thrown out of airplanes usually get very hysterical. And then they took them over the Atlantic Ocean. They threw them out of airplanes. And this has been documented many, many times. While this was happening, once an Air Force officer who later broke ranks and admitted to this stuff noted that there was a Catholic priest that would give the last rites, to all the people that were about to get thrown out of airplanes over the Atlantic Ocean. And he asked the priest, he said, "Father, are we doing the right thing? I mean, these are Argentina's, and we're throwing them out of airplanes." And the priest's response was, "Anything in the battle against communism is acceptable." And, I don't want to get too melodramatic about it, but, it seems that, there was a tremendous surge of worker power globally in this country and around the world in the late 19th and early 20th century. And, the dominant capitalist class has, retreated and barricaded and then launched a counterattack. And one of the crucial things of the World War II period was to contain the spread of this, theology of communism, of workers' power. And that's what we see ourselves, in the world today, that containment, if it served the working class, you might make an argument for it, but it doesn't, absolutely does not. Union membership in the United States, since our unions were taken over by anti-communists, has declined precipitously, as have standards of living, wages, benefits, everything else. That's the reason for this. The same thing for the, the horrible dehumanization of people categorized as autistic. It's, I think at the bottom line, it's just a way to hyper exploit any number of groups of people. And all of the people that were advocates of the civil rights movement, of the feminist movement, of the war movement, they were all accused of being anti-communist. In our country today, there are no communists to speak of. I mean, I am, but you know, I mean, the Democrats are accused of being communists. Nancy Pelosi, unbelievable. And you know, of Karl Marx's you know, famous opening phrase in the manifesto, "A specter haunts Europe, specter of communism." Many people have laughed at that and said Marx was being, you know, grandstanding and, you know, excessive. There were no communists in Europe in 1948 when he wrote the 1848 when he wrote the Communist Manifesto, and you know, so they'll dismiss him for that. But that wasn't Marx's point. Marx didn't think that there was a grand communist movement of the working class in Europe, but his point is that the ruling class is scared shitless of communism. That was his point, that, you know, those protests in the 1848 that were a combination of nationalism and anti-clerical movements and in some sense, you know, bourgeois movements, petty bourgeois movements, workers movements, however disjointed and confusing that was, the ruling class of Europe was petrified, and they said it again and again in news media all the time, that these are all communists. Until this day, we have this narrative about communism, and globally, you know, the working class is objectively, you know, probably powerful as ever, even though they don't know it. I live in the city of Los Angeles, and the port of Los Angeles handles 40% of all of the imported goods into the United States. And if those guys wanted to, they could shut down global trade. And, you know, California is the largest manufacturing region in the United States, which is next to China, the largest manufacturing nation in the world. And our agriculture, of course, is second to none. And of course, we have aerospace, and just here in California, imagine the objective power of the working class is there, right? More than ever, more integrated than ever. And to divide people because of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, it's still very much there, but it's really breaking down. So I do have a lot of hope, you know, in the long term, but in the short term, the rule the world, the economic and political elites, they will do anything, including, you know, dropping atomic bombs or throwing people out of airplanes in order to defend their class rule. So I'll leave it at that. I don't mean to sound like that's a funny thing, because it's not. That's it.
Oh, thanks so much, Dr. Powelson. That was very good. A lot of information there. Big round of applause for Dr. Powelson. We are now going to open up the floor to some questions. We took some previously from the chat. I have got them here. Joe Howard asked Dr. Powelson, did Stalin propose a pact to Churchill and FDR to join together against Hitler's Germany prior to 1939? Dr. Powelson?
Yeah, my understanding is that the Soviets were desperately trying to have an alliance with Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, and that France in particular, and even, you know, just to back up a little bit, in 1938 was the Munich Agreement, in which, you know, they were going to let Germany take Czechoslovakia, and then there would, you know, Neville Churchill famously said, "We shall have peace in our time." And it was only after all the other powers had made a peace arrangement with Germany, the Soviet Union did the same with the Hitler-Stalin Pact. I'm not endorsing the Hitler-Stalin Pact. I think, you know, it was probably a bad thing for the Soviets to do, but I can understand it. From the Soviet perspective, it looked like all of the Western capitalist world was ganging up on the Soviet Union, because at Munich was, you know, Germany, of course, Italy, France, Britain, they elected this. The United States had a non-voting representative at Munich, And it looked very much like the capitalist powers were telling, Germany, take us, by the way, you got a green light from the Soviet Union. And so it's after that that I think out of desperation, Stalin and Molotov make an agreement with the German government, trying to, maybe delay an invasion. And even with the ultimate German invasion of Poland in 1949, the Soviet Union the agreement was that Germany would take the western half of Poland, roughly, and then the Soviet Union take the eastern half of Poland. Weeks after, 2 weeks after the German invasion of Poland, the Soviets were still trying to get an agreement with England and France, like, I'll join an alliance with you. But, the obsession with communism, they didn't do it. And so the Soviets ultimately abided by the Hitler-Stalin Pact. But yeah, there was a lot of effort on the part of the Soviet Union to try to, organize against Hitler from the very beginning. I mean, the first, victims of Hitler, Nazi, would be communists, German communists, and then German socialists were next. So, and they were the ones that were doing battle with the fascists going back to the late 20s and early 30s. But yeah, definitely there was an effort on the part of the Soviet Union to try to get, Britain and France in an alliance against Nazi Germany. If that answers your question.
I think that's a pretty good answer. I have a question from CE. They directed it to whoever can answer it. I think it might be a good one to throw to our very own Caleb Maupin. How do you address critics of socialism who say that they lived it and that's why they're anti-socialist?
Well, the first thing to point out is that these individuals are not representative of the entire experience of their country. Look, if you want to learn about the U.S. Civil War, probably the worst piece of material you could watch would be the movie Gone with the Wind. That is one perspective on the U.S. Civil War, but it gives a perspective that is very, very biased. And if your entire perception of the U.S. Civil War was Gone with the Wind, you would have a very biased view of it, especially, A Birth of a Nation, same idea, right? That's not to say that there weren't people on the Confederate side who suffered atrocities, who may have, felt like they were treated unfairly, but that's only one side of the story. That's not the story of the enslaved people who gained liberation from that war. That's not the side of the story of the Union organizers in the North who were big supporters of Abraham Lincoln. It's not the perspective of Harriet Tubman, the first woman to lead U.S. troops into battle, but it's one perspective. And generally, the kind of people that get visas to come to the United States from socialist countries are people who are very, very devoted to the anti-communist side in the country that they have come from. So they're going to give you a very, very tainted perspective. And on top of that, you'll get some folks who come here who maybe they don't, haven't come here because of their ideological or political commitments. When they get here, first of all, in order to become a U.S. citizen, you have to sign something that says you're not a communist. So, if they were to go around saying pro-communist things, that could put their position in the country in jeopardy, number one. Number two, generally, when you're in a new country and you're from somewhere else, you want to fit in. So you don't go around saying things against the country and the system that you just moved to. You generally say things that people want to hear. So, when Americans say, oh, you came from Cuba, tell us about the evil, rotten system. Even if maybe deep down you have more of a mixed view of it, you're going to get immigrant folks who will then tell the Americans what they want to hear. And they'll say yes, and they'll emphasize and maybe even go to great lengths to exaggerate the horrors that they heard. But the truth is, in every former socialist country of Eastern Europe, not just the USSR, but Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, every one of those countries, they do poll after poll after poll. And consistently, the polls show the population living there saying that life was better before the fall of the Soviet Union and before the Marxist-Leninist parties were overturned. So when you meet somebody from Eastern Europe who says it was so horrible and now it's so great that we're free under the Western capitalist system, they don't represent their population. I mean, overwhelmingly, polls show their population saying life was better, despite whatever flaws that existed. And we should admit that flaws go on. And that's not to say that, I mean, there aren't bad things that have been done in the name of socialism and real suffering that has happened. But a lot of the suffering that people will blame the socialist system for is actually the fault of the United States. One very common trope you'll hear from people from Eastern Europe is they'll say, oh, because of the rotten communist system, I never got to eat bananas. That's one I've heard, right? Bananas, right? This is things we can buy in American stores. They say, look, American capitalism is great. We can get bananas, but in the Soviet system that I grew up under, we never had bananas. Well, is that because the Soviet leaders were just so evil they wouldn't allow the people to eat bananas? No, that's because of an economic blockade imposed by the United States that prevented the inflow of consumer goods that had to be imported. You know, they don't grow bananas in the USSR. So they would have to be imported, and economic sanctions and blockades, you know, put that up. So there's two sides to every story. The world is much more complicated than you would think. And generally, the last people you should be looking to as a credible source on the history of socialist countries are people who fled from there, got visas to live in the United States, and now go around telling people how awful it is. So that's my perspective.
I knew that you were the right
Yeah, if I
person
can,
to that question too. That was a fantastic answer.
If I could
Caleb.
concur, is it?
Yeah, go for
it. Caleb was absolutely. If you do, I think Gallup poll in 2013, so it's some years, but it was the same thing in the early 1990s that a healthy majority of people in the old Soviet Union felt they were better off under the old Soviet system. And I had that personal experience because I taught at Olmsted University in Western Siberia after the collapse of the Soviet Union from 2002 to 2003. And after a while, at first they didn't want to say anything because I was American. But then once they got to know me better, they, you know, all the people I knew, they said, oh, it was better than the old Soviet system by far, you know. So I concur with what Caleb is saying, and like he also said, you know, it wasn't a panacea. There was a lot of problems with the Soviet system, and I'm not sure, you know, how, you know, truly communist it was. You know, there's a debate about, you know, to what extent, you know, there were independent worker councils and how much, you know, working class democracy there really was, but nonetheless, it's absolutely true.
Fantastic. We do have a super chat question from Old Gringo. It's a very simple one that I'll give a real quick answer to. Is it true that Karl Marx and Abraham Lincoln wrote letters to each other? Yes, they did have correspondence. If you're interested in it, there is a book called The Civil War in the United States, which contains that correspondence as well as a lot of other writings on the Civil War by both Karl Marx and Frederick Engels. Great book. Very good compilation. I'd highly recommend that. Joe Howard had a question for David Fox. How can we teach people about the history of May Day whilst not losing a current focus?
Well, that's actually a very good point, and I think that's something we've got to be very mindful of when we're trying to educate workers, especially about the importance of May Day. It's not to actually lose focus and actually lose ourselves and what we know. I think for starters, like I said, we've got to actually find out what those workers' concerns are first, and find out where they're at. And also keep the language simple as well. Don't need to go into a long historical context because you'll just lose people straight away. And I notice that throughout all the time. I've done it myself, in fact, trying to educate the importance of May Day. But I think look, you're not going to win everyone over straight away. It's not like a magical wand. You just go, hey, presto, bang, everyone's won over just after you've just spoken to them. It will take some consistent effort. It will take some time, and I think that's something to keep in account. But most important, like I said when I talk, it has to be related to what their everyday concerns are. What are they? What are their struggles? There's actually a few points I missed out It's one of those, when I do a talk, I thought, oh, I should have said this, should have said that. But I think it's most important, like, look at where the current conditions. They might be in the gig economy. They could be part-time, casual, and some form of precarious employment. They're just trying to make ends meet every day, just trying to barely survive. So the last thing they need to know is great social change. Probably they just need to know some basic demands for their immediate circumstances. So I think what we ought to be looking at here is start from that, and then we work our way forward from there. I mean, it's you look at what the catchphrase for the Russian Revolution was peace, land, and bread. It wasn't about, oh, we want more socialism, this, and this. It was actually related to the people's demands. So start from there, and I think keep it simple.
Very good. I'm going to do one more question here. This is a question from Jesse Scherer, and it's for Jose. Is there a way to support students that considers individuality and different learning styles, but doesn't segregate, even when we have to work with crowded classrooms and benchmarks, which I think is a very good question.
Yeah, my answer to that has always been, instead of having separate buildings, because you have to understand that certain people have certain needs. And what I've always said is, instead of putting them in another school building, why don't you just create a separate wing that would have the same fellowship environment to normal, what we call normies in the neurodivergent population, to have them sitting in the same lunchrooms, same environments, but have a separate wing, and having them deal with individual education requirements. It's not segregation, it's having them involved in an actual community, but it's actually distributing it to their needs, because they need to have that one-on-one environment. They need to have that special quote unquote special environment. And because of that, it would be inclusive. Certain things also academically, I've had a lie told to me from my personal experience as a neurodivergent, that I couldn't take AP classes. I could not take AP classes because I was special needs. So these lies, these certain detractors, if you will, have to stop, and that you have to keep on engaging with them to say, okay, how can we get this person from point A to point B? Actually plan the thing. This is where individual education plans have to be cooperative, not in the sense of cooperative as in these grifter styles of education, but to actually be cooperative, actually letting the student create their own goals. And from there, having the environment work with them rather than them being pushed like a can into, like a sardine can into the environment of a normie,
Absolutely. And with that, I think we're going to conclude. A huge thank you to all the speakers today. Everybody was very informative, brought a lot of information. I think we're all going to find very useful going forward. Thanks again to the CPI for putting this on. And yeah, good night, everyone.
Thank you.